Hi, my name is Daphne Goodyear, and I am the survivor, along with my mother, father, grandmother, and sister, of a concentration camp in Shanghai, China, during the Second World War. We were prisoners of war thrown into these concentration camps at the hands of the Japanese military, who had invaded China starting in 1937. So this is really an historic document, a true story about my family and how they survived the insurrection by the Japanese. My mother entered Shanghai society at its very peak. It was known back then as the Paris of the East, and it was absolutely a wonderful place to live, and my parents loved it there. My father was a very successful doctor, treating the likes of Chiang Kai-shek, also the president of China at the time, TV Soon, as well as the very prominent and famous writer Lu Xun. It was an absolutely magical life, and they both, my entire family, loved Shanghai. This is a story about my mother's journey from the privileged and secure life of pre-World War II Shanghai to the ugly realities of a city under Japanese occupation, and then lives condemned. My mother and my whole family's lives were condemned to concentration camps. This is a vivid account of my mother's efforts to keep her family together and preserve as much normalcy as possible while facing the cruel hardships and incessant fear as the whole world descended into global war. The Japanese army first attacked China in 1937. However, even though they occupied Shanghai, life pretty much there went on like normal until December 8th, 1941. That would be December 7th in the United States, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Life for my parents and everybody else, at least on the Allied side of the war, would have their lives changed in an unbelievable fashion. Our lives changed dramatically. There we were when the news came of the Pearl Harbor bombing in our house in the international settlement of Shanghai. This was an absolutely gorgeous residential area with beautiful houses, and the one we lived in my parents had designed and built years before. But it had to be an absolutely mind-boggling shock to see this coming picture I'm about to show you of the Japanese marching into the international settlement, one of the most lovely and beautiful residential neighborhoods on the earth. But here they are. I just cannot imagine what my parents must have felt like watching this invasion. But anyway, my mother would never forget how viciously the Japanese entered our house one day and dragged my father to concentration camp on Haiphong Road. For some reason, they thought my dad, a very well-known doctor, would have secrets or important information to share that could get other people in trouble. But my father was not one of those. He didn't have any information. And the cruelty bestowed on him at Haiphong Road was unbelievable. He was a doctor, and he stood by helplessly in spite of asking the Japanese captors to give him medicine for his fellow internees. They refused. So my father had the agony of watching so many of them die. Anyway, 4 months later, we were dragged out of our house. Here's a picture of my grandmother and my twin sister and me on the front porch of our house in the international settlement. And those tags on us show where we're going to be taken into concentration camp. Oh, my mother was just beside herself. She hadn't seen her husband in 4 months, and she really didn't know whether he was dead or alive. My mother's story of her experience was written shortly after her return to California. My twin sister and I were too young to remember anything that happened when we were interned. But my mother created a memoir that would give the whole world an idea of what it was like being interned for all those days. She never knew whether or not she would see her beloved husband again. I mean, that was one of the biggest forms of torture. Another form of torture was being confined and never knowing if this was going to go on forever. So you had no idea about what the future held. And can you imagine how torturous that must be to every day to be living in that kind of limbo? But that's what they did. That's what they did. And my father and mother both longed for each other. And in their communiques after returning to the United States, their love grew out of that absence. I guess the old cliche, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Well, I think that's sort of trivial in lieu of these circumstances. But concentration camp is something that nobody nowadays that hasn't experienced it understands the extreme mental and physical cruelty that being interned perpetrates. We all hear about the German concentration camps. In some ways, I believe that the Japanese concentration camps were worse because they tortured people endlessly. I mean, I don't even want to go into some of the things that the Japanese did. If you want to read about it, then go buy the book Rape in Nanking, and you'll get an idea of the utter evil and cruelty of these Japanese invaders of the incredible country of Shanghai, of China, that my parents loved so dearly. They had such a wonderful life there. But then it was all over. Camp conditions at Chapai internment camp, which was where we were interned, was, relatively speaking, not dire. But what comes through loud and clear, I forgot to show you this picture of my mother and father. Oh gosh, those two were so in love with each other. Oh, I just love looking at this picture. Here they are, all dressed up for probably some glamorous party. They were on the top of everybody's invitation list. They were a very, very popular couple. But to continue with my mother's thoughts about concentration camp, Chapai was not as bad as Haiphong Road, that's for sure. I can tell you, though, that my mother suffered greatly, especially over the fate of my father, and for the fear of the safety of her family prior to and during internment. Hers was not physical torture, but emotional torture. She battled hard to make the best of things and to put on a brave face. My mother's story is about optimism and perseverance, and serves as a wonderful testament to the human spirit. Internment left my mother with a loathing for the Japanese, which lasted the rest of her life. But at the same time, she would always praise with using all the superlatives you can think of about her love for the Chinese people. She had a lifelong devotion to them, and it was just wonderful when she started talking about the Chinese people that she knew during the years she lived in Shanghai. In the face of evil circumstances, my mother's irrepressible spirit and courage came shining through. She was a truly remarkable woman who lived an extraordinary life in an extraordinary period of history. And then everything was gone with the wind. But then she was able to return to the United States and start a new life with my father in California. So, Internment in Shanghai is an account of an absolutely amazing period in the history of the world, and my mother's wonderful experience before the war, and the trials and tribulations and the extreme pain and suffering of being interned in a Japanese concentration camp. So I hope you all will enjoy the book. It's a true story and historical document, now published for the first time for the world to know what it was like during the Second World War in Shanghai, China.